So, um, on a Tuesday morning in March 2021, basically this invisible global conveyor belt just snapped.
Completely snapped.
Right. And the crazy part is the culprit wasn't, a sophisticated cyber attack or a global superpower declaring war.
Or a financial collapse, yeah.
Exactly. It was just a gust of wind, a single narrow ditch in the Egyptian desert, and a ship roughly the size of the Empire State Building.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. And in the blink of an eye, the world started hemorrhaging something like $10 billion a day. So welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we are pulling from some incredibly detailed source material. We've got comprehensive archives detailing the 2021 Suez Canal obstruction and also the historical 1888 Convention of Constantinople.
Right, some deep history there.
Yeah, so our mission today is to get past the memes,
Mhm.
the ones with tiny excavator, and really look at the physics, the archaic maritime laws,
Mhm.
and the terrifying fragility of the whole just-in-time global economy.
Yeah, because it was really the moment where this abstract concept of, globalization suddenly became a very real, very stuck physical object.
A very literal bottleneck.
Exactly. I mean, for decades, supply chains have operated totally in the background of our lives. You click a button, and 2 days later, a package arrives.
Like magic.
Right, like magic. The infrastructure making that possible is completely invisible to the average consumer. But when the Ever Given wedged itself into the banks of the Suez Canal, it provided this sudden, really uncomfortable X-ray of how fragile that infrastructure actually is.
It totally did. And to really grasp the sheer scale of that fragility, we have to, look at the ship itself.
The scale's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. I mean, at 20,000 TEU, which is 20-foot equivalent units, we're talking about essentially 20,000 standard semi-truck trailers stacked on one floating chassis.
It's a literal floating city of boxes.
Right. It's 400 meters long, weighing in at 224,000 tons. The engineering required just to keep that much steel buoyant is staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you look at where it was trying to navigate. The Suez Canal opened in 1869. And sure, they've had recent multi-billion-dollar expansion projects, but much of its length is still just a single-lane waterway.
Yeah, it's essentially 19th century infrastructure trying to accommodate 21st century megaships.
Which seems like a recipe for disaster.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the evolution of these megaships is entirely driven by economies of scale.
Like trying to pack as much as possible to save money.
Exactly. In the shipping industry, the profit margins are incredibly thin. So the more containers you can pack onto a single voyage, the lower the cost per container.
Makes sense.
Right. So over the last few decades, shipbuilders have been in this relentless arms race to maximize capacity, but they are constrained by the actual physical geography of the Earth.
They literally can't build them any wider.
Right. Ships are designed specifically to the maximum dimensions that can physically squeeze through places like the Panama Canal, the Strait of Malacca, and of course the Suez Canal.
So they are operating at the absolute limit of what the planet's waterways can handle.
Exactly. The absolute limit.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because when you have a ship operating at the physical limit of its environment, the operational structure running that ship seems, like a nightmare of liability.
The massive web.
Like, get this, the Ever Given is registered in Panama.
Which is a flag of convenience, yeah.
Right, and it's owned by a Japanese firm, Shui Kisen Kaisha. But then this leads to Evergreen Marine, which is a Taiwanese company.
Mm-hmm.
And the day-to-day operations are handled by a German company, Bernhard Schulte Ship Management, while it's physically crewed by 25 Indian nationals. It's literally a corporate nesting doll.
It really is. And, that structure is actually incredibly common in maritime logistics.
Really, just standard practice.
Yeah, it compartmentalizes risk and optimizes for tax and labor laws. But the complexity really multiplies when that vessel enters the Suez Canal.
Because of the local rules, right?
Exactly, because the Egyptian government mandates that an official maritime pilot from the Suez Canal Authority, the SCA, has to board the ship.
And they just take over.
Effectively, yes. They take command of navigation for the transit. On the morning of the grounding, there were actually 2 SCA pilots on board.
See, I've always struggled to understand this part of maritime procedure.
It does sound a bit odd at first.
Right, because if you have a captain who knows the, quirks of that specific 224,000-ton vessel, like how it responds to the throttle, its turning radius, its blind spots, Why on earth does maritime law force them to hand over operational control to a local pilot who just climbed aboard 10 minutes ago?
Yeah.
It's like handing the keys to a skyscraper laid on its side to a local valet who has never driven your specific car. It just seems counterintuitive to safety.
It does seem that way, definitely. Until you consider the unique hydrology and geography of a canal system.
Okay, how so?
Well, a deep-sea captain is an expert at navigating open oceans, right? Dealing with deep water swells and massive weather systems. But the Suez Canal is an entirely different beast. The bottom is shallow and it shifts constantly. The microcurrents are highly unpredictable, and the wind patterns coming off the Sinai Peninsula can change in minutes.
So it's hyper-local knowledge that you need.
Precisely. And there are very few static visual landmarks to use for alignment. The SCA pilots navigate that specific 193-kilometer stretch every single day.
Wow. Every day.
Yeah, they know the subtle changes in the water's surface that indicate a shifting sandbar. The system basically assumes that local geographic expertise is vastly more critical in a narrow channel than vessel-specific familiarity.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it sets up an environment where the margins for error are basically zero.
Absolutely zero.
And on the morning of March 23rd, those margins just disappeared completely. So it's 07.4 EM local time.
Right.
The Ever Given is the fifth ship in a northbound convoy. There are 15 vessels trailing directly behind
That's
it.
a huge line of traffic.
Yeah. And they hit this severe sandstorm, which obviously drops visibility. But the more critical factor in all the reports is the wind.
The wind was the real catalyst.
Yeah, it was blowing in excess of 40 knots, which is roughly 46 miles per hour.
And this is where the sheer scale of the ship works against it. You know, the hull itself is massive, but above the deck, you have those 20,000 TEUs stacked high into the air.
Wait. Help me with the physics here, because I'm looking at the numbers and my brain is completely rejecting the conclusion.
It is hard to picture.
Like, you have a 224,000-ton steel mountain. A Category 5 hurricane barely moves a concrete building.
Right.
How on earth does a 46-mile-per-hour wind push something that massive entirely off its course?
Well, it comes down to surface area and windage. A concrete building is dense, right? It's relatively compact.
Yeah, sure.
But a megaship stacked with containers is essentially a massive flat wall of steel. When a crosswind hits that broadside, those stacked containers act exactly like a giant sail.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a 40-knot wind hitting a sail of that square footage doesn't just push a little, it generates millions of pounds of lateral force.
Millions of pounds.
Yeah.
Just from the wind.
Exactly. So the ship's bow thrusters and its rudder are fighting to keep the vessel centered, but they are fighting this immense amount of atmospheric pressure, pushing the entire structure sideways toward the canal bank.
But the wind isn't the only force at play, right? Because the source materials place heavy emphasis on the hydrodynamics of the canal itself. Specifically, this thing called the bank effect.
Right. The wind was really merely the trigger that initiated the bank effect, which is the true culprit behind the grounding.
Okay, so what exactly is the bank effect?
Well, experts from the University of Ghent analyzed the tracking data, and the fluid dynamics are just fascinating. When a vessel the size of the Ever Given moves through a shallow, narrow waterway, it has to displace a colossal volume of water.
Right, because it takes up so much space.
Exactly. That water gets squeezed into the tight spaces between the ship's hull and the canal banks.
Oh, it's like water rushing through a nozzle. The tighter the space, the faster the water has to move to get out of the way.
Precisely. And this is where Bernoulli's principle comes into effect.
Bernoulli's principle. Okay, remind me what that is.
So Bernoulli's principle basically states that an increase in the speed of a fluid occurs simultaneously with a decrease in pressure.
Okay.
So if a gust of wind pushes the ship slightly off the center line, getting it closer to the right bank, the gap on that side becomes very narrow.
So the water speeds up on that side.
Yes. The water rushing through that narrow gap accelerates drastically, which drops the water pressure on that side of the hull.
So the water on the wide side is moving slower and has higher pressure, and the water on the narrow side is moving faster with lower pressure.
Yes. And that pressure differential creates a vacuum effect.
A vacuum?
Yeah, it's an aerodynamic and hydrodynamic truth. You've probably felt it, actually, if you've ever driven a small car past a massive semi-truck on the highway.
Oh, yeah. You feel your car get physically sucked toward the truck.
Exactly. So in the canal, this low-pressure zone acts like a giant vacuum, violently sucking the rear of the ship toward the near bank. And simultaneously, the massive volume of water building up in front of the bow pushes the front of the ship away from the bank.
It creates a rotational force.
Yes,
The front is pushed left, the back is sucked right, and suddenly this 400-meter Leviathan spins diagonally.
exactly.
It isn't just a matter of crashing, it is being actively wedged into the architecture of the canal by the physics of the water itself.
It's terrifying, really. It jammed its bow deep into the eastern bank and its stern into the western bank.
Completely sideways.
Yeah. And what is deeply alarming to maritime engineers is that while we have perfected the deep-sea efficiency of these megaships, the hydrodynamics of vessels this size operating in shallow, constricted waters remains critically understudied.
We don't fully understand it.
Not at this scale, no. We have engineered ships so massive that we don't fully understand the physics of how they interact with the choke points they are forced to navigate.
That is wild. And the immediate result of that physical wedge is this macroscopic shock wave that basically instantly paralyzed the global economy.
Immediate paralysis.
By completely blocking a waterway that handles roughly 12% of all global trade, the Ever Given created the most expensive traffic jam in human history.
It was staggering. Within hours, the queue of stranded ships began to multiply. We're talking about 300 to 400 vessels trapped in the Red Sea to the south, the Mediterranean to the north, and the Great Bitter Lake in the middle of the canal system.
And the economic math on this is just mind-blowing. Lloyd's List estimated that the value of the goods delayed was $400 million every single hour.
Wow.
That is $9.6 billion a day in frozen commerce. Egypt itself was bleeding $12 to $14 million a day, just in lost transit fees.
Just burning money.
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because this wasn't just flat-screen TVs and sneakers sitting in containers.
Right, it was everything.
The entities trapped in this queue show the bizarre diversity of global shipping. I mean, imagine a highway pileup, but instead of commuters being late for work, the cars are carrying the actual concept of global commerce, plus foreign militaries, and a small city's worth of farm animals.
It's a surreal image.
Right, like the Ever Given sister ship, the Evergreen, was stuck waiting. You had two Russian Navy vessels, the Stoki and the Kola, which were conducting naval exercises and suddenly found themselves boxed in.
You had bulk carriers hauling grain, crude oil tankers, liquid natural gas carriers. We're talking about over 16 million tons of dead weight just anchored and waiting.
That's sitting there.
Yeah. The canal is the primary artery for energy transport between the Middle East and Europe.
But the detail that really, highlights the immediate collateral damage is the livestock.
Oh, that was a huge crisis.
The reports indicate there were 130,000 sheep trapped on ships in this traffic jam, mostly destined for Romania. What happens to livestock logistics when the ships just stop moving in the middle of the desert?
It escalates into a severe animal welfare crisis almost immediately. Livestock transport relies heavily on continuous movement to maintain airflow through the holding pens.
Okay, so the wind cools them down.
Yes. When a ship stops, the temperature inside those holds skyrockets. Organizations like Animals International were sounding the alarm that every hour counted.
But, don't these ships have surplus requirements? I imagine there must be regulations about carrying extra food and water for delays, right?
There are. There are legal requirements to carry roughly a 25% surplus of feed and water. But in practice, compliance is highly variable.
Of course it is.
Right. And a 6-day delay easily exhausts those margins regardless. Furthermore, prior reports from the European Commission had heavily criticized these specific livestock transport vessels, noting that many were converted cargo ships that were drastically substandard.
Oh, so they weren't even meant for animals.
Exactly. They often lacked proper ventilation systems and were structurally unfit for long-term delays. So the animals were subjected to blistering Egyptian sun with depleting resources.
That's awful.
It really illustrates how rapidly a logistical supply chain failure cascades into a biological crisis.
Yeah, the interconnectedness is literally everywhere. You see the same kind of cascading failure in the energy markets during those 6 days, but in a completely counterintuitive way.
The oil markets were a wild ride.
Right, because when the main artery for Middle Eastern oil is choked off, the immediate assumption is that oil prices will skyrocket and stay high until the oil starts flowing again.
And that assumption totally fueled the initial market reaction. Panic set in immediately, and crude oil prices spiked because traders assumed the physical supply to European refineries would be starved.
Makes total sense.
But a fascinating economic correction occurred the moment the canal finally reopened, which actually saw oil prices plummet.
Wait, why would they plummet? The oil was still delayed. If anything, the market had just gone 6 days without fresh supply.
It comes down to market psychology versus physical logistics.
Okay.
During the 6-day blockage, European refineries drew down their strategic reserves, meaning they survived the immediate shortage.
So they didn't run out.
Right. But out in the water, a massive backlog of oil tankers had been accumulating. When the canal reopened, it was like popping a cork on a shaken bottle.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, a massive concentrated glut of delayed oil tankers all flooded into the European market at the exact same time.
Just a wave of oil.
Yes. This sudden oversupply caused prices to crash. It perfectly demonstrates how hyper-optimized supply chains react violently to interruptions, first with panic pricing, followed by a whiplash oversupply.
Which makes the operation to free the ship incredibly urgent. Every hour it sits there, billions of dollars are burning, animals are suffering, and the market is convulsing.
The pressure on the salvage team was immense.
So the Suez Canal Authority brings in Royal Boskalis and their subsidiary, Smit Salvage.
Yeah, the Dutch experts.
These are the guys you call when marine engineering goes completely sideways.
Smit Salvage has a legendary reputation. They handled the raising of the Russian submarine Kursk and the removal of the Costa Concordia. They are the ultimate heavyweights in maritime crisis management.
Well, reading through the early proposals for how to move a 224,000-ton immovable object, some of the ideas sound incredibly practical at first glance, but they were quickly discarded.
People threw out a lot of wild ideas online.
Oh, totally. Like using heavy-lift helicopters to pick up the containers one by one to lighten the ship. I mean, on paper, it sounds like the obvious solution. If your car is stuck in the mud, you take the heavy luggage out of the trunk, right?
The logic is sound, but the math is impossible.
How so?
You have to scale the operation. A standard 40-foot shipping container can weigh up to 30 tons when fully loaded.
Go.
Even the most powerful heavy-lift helicopters in the world, like the Sikorsky Sky Cranes or the Russian Mil-Me-26, max out at a lifting capacity of around 20 tons.
Oh, wow. So they literally can't pick them up?
They physically cannot lift most of those containers.
Okay, well, what about floating crane ships? Just sail a massive crane alongside and offload the boxes onto smaller barges?
Again, it's a matter of logistics and time. Bringing in a crane ship with a boom high enough to reach the top of a 20,000 TEU stack and stable enough to operate in the canal would take weeks just to sail to the location from wherever it was stationed globally.
Ways they didn't have.
Exactly. Furthermore, the unloading process is painstakingly slow, and you would be introducing massive, unstable machinery into a narrow channel with unpredictable winds.
Which is what caused the problem in the first place.
Right. Peter Berdowski, the CEO of Boskalis, stated explicitly that unloading was the absolute last resort, like a plan C, because it would prolong the crisis by weeks, if not months. They needed a solution that would free the hull intact.
So if they can't take the weight off the top, they have to attack the problem from below.
Yes, from the mud itself.
The strategy they actually deployed was this masterclass in brute force engineering. First, they attacked the mud.
The bow was rammed so deep into the clay and sand of the eastern bank, so they deployed these specialized cutter suction dredgers.
How are those different from regular excavators?
Unlike an excavator that just scoops dirt, a cutter suction dredger uses a rotating cutter head to break up the hard clay beneath the water, mixing it with water to create a slurry.
Okay.
Powerful pumps then vacuum that slurry out from underneath the ship's hull and discharge it miles away through floating pipelines.
Just hollowing out the bank under the ship.
Exactly. By March 26th, these dredgers had removed tens of thousands of cubic meters of sand, clearing 87% of their targeted material around the bow.
Incredible. And second, while they were vacuuming the mud, they manipulated the ship's buoyancy.
Yes.
They pumped out 9,000 tons of ballast water. The physics here are simple. Decrease the internal weight, and the ship naturally wants to sit higher in the water.
Right, reducing the draft and potentially floating the hull off the mud bank.
But dredging and pumping ballast only loosen the grip, right? They don't provide the kinetic energy to actually move the vessel.
No, for that you need the tugboats.
Lots of them. They amassed a fleet of 14 tugboats, just swarming this giant ship. But the real turning point was the arrival of two massive specialized seagoing tugs.
The big guns.
Yeah, the Dutch tug Alpguard and the Italian Carlo Magno. The power metrics on these vessels are absurd. The Alpguard has a bollard pull of 285 tons.
And bollard pull is the definitive metric for a tugboat's capability. It measures the amount of pulling force a vessel can exert under zero forward speed, essentially how much pure static tension it can put on a tow line.
So just raw pulling power.
Exactly. A standard harbor tug might have 30 to 50 tons of bollard pull.
And the Alpgard brings 285.
Yeah. The Alpgard bringing 285 tons, combined with the Carlo Magno's 153 tons, meant they suddenly had an astronomical amount of directed kinetic force to pull the stern away from the bank.
So picture this. You have the suction dreiders hollowing out the earth, you have the ballast pumped out to maximize buoyancy, and you have over a dozen tugboats roaring their engines, putting hundreds of tons of tension on the steel tow cables.
It's an incredible amount of force.
But for days, nothing happens. The ship is still stuck. It actually requires one final, unpredictable element to break the stalemate. On March 29th, at 15:05 local time, they finally wrenched the ship free, and they did it by harnessing celestial mechanics.
It is arguably the most poetic element of the entire crisis.
It really is.
Human engineering had reached its absolute limit, and they had to rely on the gravitational pull of the solar system. The salvage team deliberately timed their maximum pulling effort to coincide with a spring tide.
Right. And it wasn't just a standard high tide, it was amplified by a supermoon.
Exactly. A spring tide occurs during a full or new moon when the Earth, Moon, and Sun are aligned a state called syzygy.
Syzygy, what a word.
Great word. Their combined gravitational forces exert maximum pull on the Earth's oceans, creating exceptionally high tides. In this specific instance, the full moon was also a supermoon, meaning it was at its closest point to Earth in its elliptical orbit.
So it's pulling even harder.
Yes, this proximity amplified the gravitational effect even further.
So you have the combined horsepower of 14 modern tugboats pulling in unison, augmented by the literal gravitational pull of the moon lifting the ocean itself by an extra 46 centimeters.
That extra 1.5 feet of water was the final margin they needed.
Unbelievable.
The stern swung free first, and by mid-afternoon, the bow was dislodged. The Ever Given was free.
Wow. So the physical blockade was finally over, the ship was towed up to the Great Bitter Lake for safety inspections, and traffic through the canal slowly resumed.
Huge sigh of relief globally.
Yeah, but the moment the physical machinery of global trade started moving again, the legal machinery slammed into a brick wall.
Oh, the legal battle was just beginning.
The ship was sitting in the lake, and the Suez Canal Authority essentially slid a bill across the table to the ship's Japanese owners, a bill for $1 billion.
Admiral Osama Rabi, the head of the SCA, publicly demanded $1 billion to cover the lost transit revenue during the 6 days, the operational costs of the massive salvage effort, and a highly subjective charge for, quote, loss of reputation.
Loss of reputation. They essentially claimed the ship embarrassed the canal on the global stage.
Yeah, an interesting legal flex.
And when Shui Kisen-Kaisha and their British insurers predictably balked at paying a billion-dollar ransom, the Egyptian government didn't just file a lawsuit. On April 13th, a court in Ismailia ordered the ship formally arrested. They seized the vessel and all of its cargo.
This action plunged the entire situation into the incredibly complex labyrinth of international admiralty law, a legal framework whose origins stretch back centuries.
So what does this all mean? This is where the story gets deeply concerning. For the actual people who own the goods sitting inside those 20,000 containers, the ship's owner declares something called general average.
Right?
This is a maritime concept that I had never heard of, but it is terrifying if you are a small business owner. It basically dictates that if a ship suffers a major casualty event, the owners of the cargo on board must chip in to cover the cost of rescuing the vessel.
The concept of general average is ancient. Its roots can be traced back to the Rhodian maritime law in ancient Greece.
Ancient Greece.
Literally. The foundational logic is equitable risk sharing. Imagine a wooden merchant ship in a storm. The crew has to throw some cargo overboard to lighten the ship and save the rest of the voyage.
Okay.
General average ensures that the merchant whose cargo was sacrificed is compensated proportionally by the merchants whose cargo was saved. It prevents total ruin for a single party when an emergency requires sacrifice for the common good.
But applying an ancient Greek maritime philosophy to a modern 20,000 TEU megaship creates an absolute logistical nightmare.
Oh, total nightmare.
It's like if my Uber crashes into a ditch. And the driver tells me I have to help pay for the tow truck based on the value of the groceries in my trunk before he'll unlock the doors.
That's a great analogy, actually. The logistics of executing general average on the scale are agonizing. An independent adjuster must be appointed to determine the total value of the ship, the cost of the salvage, and the exact value of every single piece of cargo on board.
For 20,000 containers.
Yes, they have to assess 20,000 individual containers, holding everything from cheap plastic toys to high-end electronics.
And the precedent for this is financially devastating for cargo owners. The sources point to the 2018 fire on the container ship Suez Canal. In that case, the adjusters determined that in order to release the surviving cargo, the owners had to pay a security deposit equal to 54% of their cargo's value.
54%, just think about that. For massive multinational corporations, this is a known risk. They have comprehensive marine cargo insurance that handles the general average bonds.
Right, it's just a line item for them.
But a significant portion of container space is leased by small to medium-sized enterprises. A small business owner might have an uninsured container full of their entire seasonal inventory.
Oh, man.
Suddenly, they're informed that not only is their inventory indefinitely delayed, but they must pay a massive, unexpected ransom to retrieve it. A general average declaration can bankrupt smaller logistics companies and retailers overnight. They're held financially hostage for an accident they had absolutely no control over.
And the cargo wasn't the only thing held hostage. We have to look at the human cost here.
The human element is often totally ignored in these logistics stories.
Yeah, the 25 Indian seafarers crewing the Ever Given were trapped. Because the physical ship was legally arrested by the Egyptian court, the crew was effectively detained on board, anchored in the Great Bitter Lake.
International seafarer unions were quick to condemn the situation, labeling the crew as human pawns caught in a billion-dollar corporate standoff.
Bonds.
Yeah. The Egyptian authorities blamed the owners for not paying the $1 billion, the insurers called the demand absurd, and in the middle were 25 men who just wanted to go home.
And they had a terrifying precedent staring them in the face. The sources detail the case of the MV Emon, which is one of the most chilling stories of maritime abandonment.
It really is a dark side of the industry. The MV Emon was a cargo ship detained in the Suez Canal in July 2017 due to safety and regulatory disputes.
Okay, so kind of similar.
Right. And Egyptian law requires an arrested vessel to have a legal guardian, a crew member, remain on board to maintain the safety of the vessel.
So someone has to stay behind.
Yes. Because of endless legal disputes between the owners and the authorities, one crew member, the first mate, Mohammed Aisha, was forced to remain on that abandoned, powerless ship for 4 years.
4 years. Trapped on a ghost ship in the canal.
Entirely alone for much of it.
So the 25 guys on the Ever Given are sitting in the lake looking at this legal gridlock over $1 billion, knowing that the MV Aman is a very real possibility under Egyptian legal precedent.
Exactly. This raises an important question, though. The International Labor Organization tracks this phenomenon, noting that seafarer abandonment is a rising crisis. As of April 2021, there were over 250 known active cases globally.
That is sickening.
It exposes a profound systemic flaw in global trade. The entire global economy relies on seafarers to physically move 90% of the world's goods. Yet, because they operate under flags of convenience in international waters, when massive corporations and sovereign states fight over liability, the workers have virtually no legal recourse.
They're just invisible.
Yeah, they are compelled by maritime law to maintain the vessel indefinitely while the legal battles drag on in foreign courts.
Thankfully, it didn't take 4 years for the Ever Given crew. In May, the SCA revised their demand down to $600 million. In July, a confidential settlement was finally reached for roughly $540 million, plus a brand new 75-ton tugboat to replace one that the SCA apparently lost during the salvage operation.
A very expensive tugboat.
Yeah. The ship was finally allowed to sail to Rotterdam on July 12th, arriving over 100 days late. But by the time it dropped anchor in Europe, the ripple effects of those 6 block days in March had already permanently altered the global supply chain.
The release of the ship was actually just the ignition point for a massive logistical nightmare at the destination ports.
Right, we see the domino effect hit Europe. Ports like Antwerp and Rotterdam had used the 6-day blockage to clear out their yards and prepare. But when the canal reopened, it wasn't a steady stream of traffic, it was a tsunami.
A literal tidal wave of steel boxes.
Hundreds of delayed ships all arrived at the European docks simultaneously.
Port infrastructure operates on strict schedules. When hundreds of ships arrive at once, the physical space to unload and store containers just vanishes. The congestion was unprecedented, but it was compounded by the bizarre incentive structures of pandemic-era ocean freight rates.
Oh, this is the part that is just wild.
Yeah.
The sources note a really perverse dynamic here. Freight rates for exporting goods out of Asia were skyrocketing at the time.
Through the roof.
So the shipping lines realized they could make vastly more money loading goods in China than they could delivering goods in Europe. So the carriers began prioritizing empty containers.
Yes.
They demanded that ports load their ships with empty boxes to rush back to Asia, actively refusing to wait for the delayed full containers to be unloaded and processed.
They were prioritizing the lucrative backhaul of empty steel boxes over the delivery of actual goods.
Just shipping air.
Basically, yeah. And this created a profound disruption in just-in-time manufacturing. The entire modern industrial model relies on parts arriving at the factory exactly when they are needed for assembly, which minimizes warehousing costs.
Right, nobody keeps a stockpile anymore.
Exactly. But when those parts are stuck in a container yard because the shipping lines are rushing empty boxes back to Asia, the assembly lines halt. We saw this exacerbate the global semiconductor shortage, delaying automobile manufacturing and electronics production worldwide.
And it led to incredibly hyper-specific shortages that show just how finely tuned this system is. I mean, my absolute favorite detail from the fallout of the Ever Given is the great European garden gnome shortage of 2021.
Oh, it perfectly illustrates the absurdity of hyperglobalization.
It really does. We have built an economic system so ruthlessly optimized for financial efficiency and so devoid of resilience that a gust of wind in an Egyptian desert results in garden centers across the United Kingdom being completely unable to stock ceramic gnomes for the summer season.
It's hilarious but also terrifying.
Everything is manufactured a continent away, packed into a steel box, and routed through a single 19th century ditch.
Which naturally raises a geographic question. When the canal was blocked and billions of dollars were being lost daily, why didn't the shipping companies immediately instruct their captains to turn around and take the alternative route around the southern tip of Africa?
Right, routing around the Cape of Good Hope. I know some ships did divert, but the logistics of doing so are punishing. Taking the Cape route adds up to 2 weeks to the journey.
A massive detour.
Huge. For a megaship, that requires burning hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra bunker fuel. But beyond the fuel, it forces these highly valuable vessels into different geographic risk zones. The sources actually mention shipping companies urgently calling the U.S. Fifth Fleet stationed in Bahrain to ask about naval security escorts.
Because diverting around Africa forces ships to navigate near the Horn of Africa and the Gulf of Guinea, regions with historically high rates of maritime piracy.
Oh, right, piracy.
Yeah. The insurance premiums for taking a 20,000 TEU ship full of delayed cargo through high-risk waters without a planned security escort are astronomical.
So it's not just a matter of driving a different way.
Not at all. The entire maritime system is so dependent on the Suez Canal that the alternative route is considered a logistical and security nightmare.
And the reliance on that single choke point brings up a fascinating historical irony highlighted in the source material. The 1888 Convention of Constantinople.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Convention of Constantinople is a foundational treaty in international law.
Okay, what did it do?
Well, it was signed by the major European powers of the time, and it established the Suez Canal as an international waterway, guaranteeing the right of free passage for all ships of all nations in times of war and in times of peace.
So keeping it neutral.
Exactly. Its primary objective was to strictly prohibit the military or political blockade of the canal.
Because historically, a strategic choke point like the Suez was a major military target. Treaties were written to prevent hostile armies or navies from sinking a ship in the channel to cripple their enemy's economy. The threat was always perceived as external geopolitical aggression.
But the events of 2021 proved a very uncomfortable truth about modern infrastructure.
That we do it to ourselves.
Basically, the global economy doesn't require a hostile army, a declaration of war, or state-sponsored terrorism to be brought to its knees. It doesn't require a military blockade. It just requires one mathematically optimized cargo ship operating at the absolute limit of physical geography and a strong gust of wind.
It's wild.
We engineered a ship so massive that an accident of physics transformed it into a weapon of mass economic disruption.
And while maritime insurers panicked and supply chain managers literally tore their hair out, the internet thought the entire situation was absolutely hilarious.
Oh, the memes.
The cultural impact of this event was unprecedented for a logistics failure.
It resonated globally in a way that maritime shipping never, ever does.
I mean, it was a bleak time. The world was deep in the grind of the pandemic. Everything felt overwhelming. And suddenly, humanity was united by this massive, stuck boat. It was absurd.
It was a very welcome distraction.
The memes were endless people comparing their mental health or their insurmountable life problems to that tiny excavator digging at the bow of the ship. There was a web app called Ever Given Everywhere that let you drop a 2-scale satellite image of the ship onto your local street or your house on Google Maps, just to grasp how ridiculously large it was.
I remember that. The digital infiltration was total. There were viral TikToks dissecting the salvage operation, massive Twitter threads analyzing the bank effect, and modders from Microsoft Flight Simulator immediately added the stuck ship into the game so players could fly over it.
Google even programmed an Easter egg, so if you search Suez Canal, little cartoon boats would chug across your screen. It got name-dropped in a Fall Out Boy song. The comedy show What We Do in the Shadows wrote a whole subplot where a character gets trapped inside a container on the Ever Given.
It's amazing how it seeped into everything.
It became a cultural touchstone because it was a highly visible, almost comical failure of a system that is usually completely invisible to us.
We finally saw the X-ray of the broken arm, We saw the physical vulnerability of the abstract concept of global trade.
So to trace this incredible cascading journey, a single sandstorm in March 2021 activated the obscure fluid dynamics of the bank effect, creating a low-pressure vacuum that sucked a 224,000-ton steel mountain into the Egyptian dirt.
Perfectly summarized.
That grounding froze $10 billion of commerce a day, mobilized a massive global salvage fleet that ultimately had to rely on the celestial alignment of a supermoon to wrench the hull free.
The moon part still gets me.
It triggered archaic maritime laws from ancient Greece, trapped a crew of seafarers in legal limbo, caused an oil market whiplash, exacerbated a global microchip shortage, and temporarily eradicated the European garden gnome. It was the butterfly effect in its purest, most industrial form.
A masterclass in the fragility of complex systems.
So I ask you, the listener, again, look at an item in your room right now. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's the chair you're sitting on, or the device in your hand. Consider the incredibly fragile maritime tightrope it walked to get to you. Consider the pilots navigating narrow channels, the specialized tugboats, the volatile weather, the ancient laws, and the sheer mathematical luck required to keep the shelves stocked and the global conveyor belt moving.
And I'll leave you with a final, lingering question to mull over. For decades, maritime engineers have been in a relentless race to build bigger and bigger ships to maximize profit margins and economies of scale. But at what point does human engineering outgrow the physical geography of the Earth itself? If our ships are now too massive for the ocean's natural and man-made choke points, are we simply engineering our own inevitable gridlock?